I'm Paul Weagraff, Director of the Delaware Division of the Arts, and your host for today. Joining me today remotely is Dr. Isai Jess Muñoz, Associate Professor of Voice and Opera from the University of Delaware. Welcome, Jess.
Thank you so much for having me, Paul. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. We're talking off air about your background in opera and my background in musical theater, and there's certainly a lot of connections there. So hopefully we can get into some of that. But first, let's hear a little bit about you, your background, what got you involved in voice and opera, and then ultimately what led you to Delaware.
Well, I grew up in a preacher's house. Both my parents were ministers, and so I had always sung at my church. And then when I was 10 years old, when I was in the 5th grade, the local opera company sent some young artists to my elementary school, and they did a children's opera there. And I had never heard such ethereal singing like that in my life. And so to this day, I'm an advocate and a believer in opera outreach because of that experience that I got to have. And I just recall that after seeing that children's opera at my school, I ran home that day and I told my mom, I know what I want to do for the rest of my life. And she said, well, what's that? And I said, I want to be an opera singer. So you can just imagine the look on my mom's face. There wasn't anyone in my household who had been trained classically in music. As a matter of fact, the church that I attended was a Puerto Rican gospel church. So it was very much a different style of music. But I was a very tenacious child, and so she ended up calling the opera company and asked them if there was something that a little boy like me could do with them. And I think it was a moment of divine intervention because they said, well, actually there is. In 2 weeks, we're going to be having auditions for our children's opera chorus. So why doesn't he come in and audition for us? And so I went in with a boombox in hand. I didn't even know what sheet music was. There were over 100 kids there with sheet music. But I guess they heard something in my voice, and they ended up offering me a scholarship to study in their opera youth program. And 3 months later, I was in my first opera, which was Tosca, Puccini's Tosca, and the Scarpia. For those of you who know the plot of that opera, the Scarpia was Cheryl Milnes.
Oh, wow.
So that was an absolutely incredible experience. And then I just stayed in that apprentice program all the way through middle school and high school. And it was a wonderful preparatory place that prepared me for conservatories. And I went on to do my undergrad at the Cincinnati Conservatory and then my master's at Manhattan School of Music. And then just stayed in New York, and my career started kicking off. I did comedic roles at City Opera and other companies, both in the States and abroad. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much how things began for me.
Well, the moral of that story is never underestimate the power of a one-time exposure to high quality arts and the importance of supportive parents. So that's fascinating, Patty. I just love that story. So your career has been quite expansive in both the performing side of things as well as the teaching side of things. What brought you specifically to Delaware?
Well, I arrived to Delaware in fall of 2016. My first academic appointment after attaining my doctorate in New York was at Indiana Wesleyan University, just north of Indianapolis. It was a wonderful institution, extremely collegial. I had the opportunity there to really learn just the ropes of academia. And it was primarily a teaching institution, but I always had strong interest in furthering my research a bit more. And so when I received the invitation to join the faculty at the University of Delaware, fabulous R1 institution, I accepted, and it's been a joy to be here. And they've been extremely supportive of the work that I've been doing. And I had the opera workshop ensemble there, which really serves as a reflective think tank, which offers students an array of tools designed and selected for the actor-singer. So pretty much performers who are faced with the task of singing and acting simultaneously. And so we pretty much train students to effectively absorb a libretto, a musical score. We walk them through how to develop a character by building said material. And we use all different kinds of methods. We use historically significant methods, for those of you who are familiar with old acting methods, but we also utilize physical theater methods, where physical movement becomes a primary method of storytelling. So we've designed a curriculum that welcomes students to engage with postmodern physical theater and devising tools as well. For those of you who are theater buffs, you may know the work of Anne Bogart and her viewpoints training. It's just really interesting to see how the field of opera is expanding. And for those of you who are fans of Opera Delaware and Opera Philadelphia, and who have experienced contemporary settings of operatic material and new opera, really the field of opera, it's basically becoming a nameplate for a host of subgenres, right? We have rock opera, we have, and especially now, we're learning so much because of COVID, and virtual opera, of course, is just expanding more than ever in the forms of it. So it's really important that we provide our students with the skill sets that they need for opera in the 21st century.
Now, I know I have in the past spoken with Brendan Cook with Opera Delaware, and we've talked about opera as perhaps one of the most integrated art forms, because it integrates music, theater, the visual arts, and often dance. Could you speak to that and how, I mean, you've talked a lot here about how opera is evolving. What have been the catalysts? Has that evolution come out of need, or an influence of other art forms, or just changes in society?
Yeah, I think all of the above. I think it has burgeoned because of need, but I think that also millennials are asking for something different these days. They're very conscientious when it comes to just socially, politically charged subjects, and just social well-being and health, and artists as citizens. So not only are audiences asking for something different, but the students who study opera are also seeking to be able to expand the form and to speak into it through those through those social malaises that they see happening, right? How can they be responsive to those kinds of things? I actually serve as the vice president for conferences at the National Opera Association, which basically its mission is to promote a greater appreciation of opera and music theater. And we hold an annual conference along with a growing series of regional events. And this past year, our conference had to pivot to virtual platform. And it was really a riveting experience, which I think speaks directly to what you asked, in terms of why is it changing, how is it changing. The sessions this year and what people were bringing to discuss was really powerful. We had a session called Opera's Problem with the Fat Lady, which was all about promoting body size and diversity on stage and in the classroom. Of course, we had sessions in response to COVID-19 and how on earth can we be teaching opera to students. But then we had things like staging sexual violence through trauma-informed pedagogy, where we can create safe spaces, and things like Title IX, and how we work inside of the rehearsal space, that's also changing the way in which opera functions and works. So there's a big call for diversity, for equality, and how that's reflected both in who's cast in opera, but also who's filling the seats inside of our theaters. So these are things that really matter more than ever to the general public, but also to the performers.
Well, I want to turn to your performing career, but let me first remind our listeners that you are tuned into Delaware State of the Arts here on News Radio 1450 WILM and 1410 WDOV. Joining me today is Dr. Isai Jess Muñoz, Associate Professor of Voice and Opera at the University of Delaware. Jess, your performing career, let's go back a little bit because it's quite illustrious. You referenced earlier that it's international in scope. You have a Grammy-nominated album from about 10, 11 years ago, but you have a number of other recordings since, and you have a new recording that is just out today as we're recording. Talk a little bit about your performing career, where that took you, what some of the highlights of your experiences have been, and then we'll take a look at your new recording.
Well, thanks. I was really fortunate in that I got to do my graduate studies and then my doctoral studies in New York. And that was an intentional choice on my part because I was a little bit of a scaredy cat when I was really young. And I just felt like, well, if I want to launch a career, it might be a good idea for me to study in New York so that under the canopy of a protective environment, I could get to know a lay of the land. And so one of the cool things about being a student at the Manhattan School of Music was that they would bring in professional stage directors to stage direct the productions there. And actually the first professional job that I got as a principal artist was at the Bard Music Festival. And the person who hired me there was someone who had stage directed me at Manhattan School of Music. And so that's how things kind of took off. And early on, one of my teachers identified me as a spiel tenor, a comedic tenor, mostly because of my height and my temperament, my acting skills. And that was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to be able to do a lot of those comedic roles regionally and internationally. You don't have the pressures of being the leading tenor who has to be there front and center all the time. I got to be backstage and chill a lot and read a lot of books and reflect on the craft of singing. But yeah, I mean, I got to have an incredible time in New York, of course, singing at City Opera and at Lincoln Center. That's always been a joy. But I got to do a lot of work with the Center for Contemporary Opera as well in New York. One of my great passions is really diving into new works and workshopping new material with new composers. So I had the privilege of working with Francis Thorne and J.D. McClatchy, who's now passed. But they did an opera a number of years back, Mario and the Magician, which also was recorded on Albany Records, and working with Thomas Passatieri on his production of The Seagull. So really getting to work with living composers has always been a thrill for me. James Dashow, of course, who wrote an opera called Archimedes. He's one of the leaders in electronic opera as well. And of course, work in Baroque opera has also been a great joy for me. So yeah, those are just some of the highlights. But really being there with composers, living composers, seeing how their mind works, and that's also been one of the great joys for me at the National Opera Association, because one of the things that we do is work with new composers to disseminate their material in the collegiate setting. So just this past year, or just for this past conference, we honored the the life and legacy of composer Alice Parker, who's a strong choral composer, and many people don't know that she's composed 4 operas. And so I got to work hand in hand with her in disseminating her material. And Murray Boren, who's one of the great living Mormon composers. These things happened through an initiative that we have at the National Opera Association called the Sacred in Opera Initiative, that studies the interplay between the ideologies of world religions and opera. So that's been a real interesting initiative for me to focus on. And also because I'm a preacher's kid, but then went on to sing in a lot of different denominations, that was definitely an initiative that caught my interest early on, and that I've been a big part of for a long time now.
You mentioned Alice Parker. Am I right that Scott Joplin wrote an opera?
He did, yes. Tremonisha.
Right, Tremonisha, that was it. I couldn't think of the name, but yeah. Yeah, I mean, many of our famous American composers, you don't think about it, but, you know, there they are. Well, let's turn to your recording that was just released. Visca L'Amor, Catalan Art Songs of the 20th and 21st Centuries. Tell us about its origins, how you conceived of this, and what it took to put it together.
Sure. Well, I first want to start off by saying that it's a thrill to collaborate with a great pianist who also happens to be my wife, and also a faculty member at the University of Delaware, Dr. Oksana Glauchko, who appears on this recording with me. And as you said, the recording is focused on Catalan art song of the 20th and 21st century. Catalonia is the autonomous region in Spain, which includes Barcelona, whose language was censored in the 20th century by the repressive effects of the Spanish Civil War and the Franco dictatorship. And it's really terrible what happened to their publishing houses during that time, that were all but decimated through that period in history. But behind closed doors, the music lived on. And for decades, native composers continued to set their beautiful language, Catalan, to music. And in the last 30 years, local publishers have finally been able to salvage and gather these beautiful melodies. And so once tucked away and enshrouded, they're now being published and shared with the world. And so it's our joy to just be able to disseminate Catalonia's own distinctive musical voice and heritage, which actually some people may not realize this, but it's strongly influenced by its exchange of ideas on Impressionism and Neoclassicism with France. So we're so excited to illuminate this genre, its history, its style, so that it can continue to be sung and celebrated. And you had asked how I came to become acquainted with this repertoire. When I was doing my doctoral studies at Stony Brook University, I had actually decided that I wanted to research Iberian and Latin American art song, because interestingly, though I'm a Hispanic, a Latinx American, I had never had the opportunity to delve into research in relation to music of my own heritage while pursuing my studies in classical music. All of it was focused on Central European song literature, but not Spanish literature.
Yeah, you think Italian and Russian and
exactly, right.
German
and French and all that.
And French, right.
So I had decided that I wanted to focus on Iberian and Latin American art song. People would ask me all the time, hey, what do you sing in Spanish? And I didn't have a whole lot of repertoire at that point. So I received a grant to go to Spain. But the last thing that I expected was to become acquainted with Catalan art song. And upon hearing it, I just fell in love with it. And I just thought, oh my God, there's a treasure trove of material here to discover. And I had rarely heard of it in the United States. Victoria de Los Angeles and Montserrat Caballé, Jose Carreras, of course, they're all native Catalonians. And so they had recorded some of it. I had heard them sing some of it. but it really wasn't until I immersed myself in the culture in Barcelona for a few months that I realized that I had to look into it further, and I was just hooked from that point forward. So we've been programming this repertoire in our own recitals since 2010.
Okay. So the entire recording is you and your wife. Are any of these songs related as part of a song cycle, or are they all independent songs?
Well, it's great that you asked that. Actually, the whole album focuses on song cycles, on micro song cycles. So it's comprised of 6 song cycles, and it actually has a world premiere. We commissioned a living composer, a living Catalonian composer, Elisenda Fabregas, who wrote just the very powerful commission for us. And so we're excited that that's receiving its world premiere, and that we continue to not only celebrate the history of Catalan art song, but to move it forward as well with this new commission.
Well, we've got about 90 seconds left. Just quickly, where did you do the recordings? At the university?
We did it at the University of Delaware, and it was engineered by Andreas Meyer, and it's available now on all platforms, Spotify and iTunes and Amazon, and it's available by Bridge Records and distributed worldwide on Naxos.
I'm curious, which space at the university did you use?
It was at the Center for the Arts at Gore Recital Hall. Actually, Andreas Meyer just loves that space because it's a box within a box. So it's very insulated and you don't get any outside noise. It's just a wonderful space to record it.
Great. And just quickly, where can our listeners learn more about you? I understand you have your own website.
Yes, they can visit me at jessmunoz.com. That's JESSMUNOZ, jessmunoz.com.
Well, Jess, this has been just really exciting for me. I love talking about music. I love talking about opera and its relation to theater. This has been really exciting. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's been great having you on the show.
Thank you for having me.